Welcome to the UIUC Talkshow, where we introduce you to the most interesting people with the most interesting ideas. Today, we have Dr. Chambers with us today, who is the Associate Professor of Advertising here at the University of Illinois. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm feeling pretty well. It's a little rainy outside, but other than that, I'm feeling pretty good.
All right. I want to start off with a question that I'm pretty sure you get asked a lot, but you have a background in history, right? But you chose to do advertising, or are you pursuing advertising right now? So how did you decide to pursue this path?
Sure. Well, the thing is, I started at the university in 2001, and even before I started here, our department had courses called things like advertising in society, advertising history. So we already had a background in not just teaching students the skills of advertising, not just the how of advertising, if you will, but the why, some of the broader social, cultural, historical, psychological aspects of putting together advertisements and advertising campaigns. And so when I was in graduate school, my own area of study dovetailed around the ideas of history, African American entrepreneurship in the area of African American entrepreneurship that I studied and continue to study today was in the advertising industry. So that's how the linkage originally came. And then they learned of my work, the department, some people in the department here learned of my work when I was a graduate student, came here, interviewed, got the job. And I've been here ever since.
Great. And I know you still refer yourself as an historian first, right?
Yes.
How has learning the history more helped you with the profession you have right now?
Well, I think for me, it's learning the why, it's learning the stories, it's learning the basis and the background of advertising. For example, over the last 2 years since the murder of George Floyd, a lot of corporations and a lot of companies have tried to grapple with, issues of race, whether that's within their corporation or within their local communities, what have you. And so one of the things that history teaches us about the advertising industry is that racism, right? Discrimination, segregation has been part of the foundation of the advertising industry ever since there's been anything worthy of calling advertising. The advertising industry, kind of as we know it today, we can kind of trace its history back to 1890s. So it's, as an industry, it's about 130 years old. Now there's advertisements, things that we can call advertisements and recognize as such. Those go back 3,000 years.
Right.
But in terms of an industry, advertising agencies that are writing copy, that are putting together advertisements, that are placing advertisements, that comes along in about the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. So that, again, as an industry, you're about 130, 150 years old. Well, from its very beginning, it was very restrictive in terms of who could actually participate in the industry. So if we understand that racism, discrimination, segregation were part of the foundation of the industry, well, those things, those policies, those procedures, those practices, those traditions, they've been there for 150 years. So just because you're grappling with them now here over the past 2 years, you can't expect to solve or adequately address something that's been around for and part and parcel of this industry for the better part of a century and a half. So those are the kinds of things that history teaches. And also, as a very much a forward-leaning and a forward-thinking industry, it's also helpful, and I found this over the course of my career, it's also helpful for people to understand how advertisements have evolved, how agencies have evolved, how agency holding companies have evolved, to at least give them some basis for understanding, how they've gotten where they are today.
So you say that since the beginning of the advertising industry, you've said that a lot of these issues have been since the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Explain, and I would love to know why you think that is, and I will as well as some more context on that. Because to me, right, let's say I have this X product, and I would like that product to be purchased by as many people as possible. So from the producer point of view, it doesn't make any sense to segregate on the type of person who buys this product, because I want the product to be used by anyone. It doesn't matter who it is. Tell us more about what I'm missing.
Sure. Well, one of the things that you have to recognize and understand is who advertising agencies then consider themselves talking to, right? Who are we talking to? When we say we're advertising, when we think about our consumer, who are we talking to? Who they conceive of themselves as talking to were white women, right? And so you're not going to hire African Americans ostensibly, even in your theoretical mind, 1890s, early 1900s, you're not going to hire African Americans to come in and create campaigns to talk to white women, right? That's beyond the racial politics of the time. And so what we learn as we study and we think about the development and the evolution of advertising and marketing in the United States is we think in the United States that capitalism is the ultimate arbiter. Wherever I can go to make the most money as an individual, as a company, as a corporation, what have you, wherever I can go and whatever I can do to make the most money, whatever makes the most economic sense, I will do that thing. To your point, I will sell to as many people as possible. And what history teaches us is that's not true. Race trumps and has trumped capitalism many, many times in our history. And so that notion of I want to sell to as many people as possible, you have to evolve that a bit. I want to sell to as many people as possible whom I like to sell to, right? And so I don't want my product to become identified. And this was a worry on the part of advertising agencies and even their corporate clients, is that notion of, well, we don't want our product to become identified. We don't want it to become identified as being a black product, if you will. And so for that reason, there's an active avoidance in a lot of ways, cases, and spaces, an active avoidance of any notion that you're trying to market these products to African American consumers. So did you try actively not to sell them to them? No. Did you keep them out of African American owned stores and things of that nature? No. But did you actively pursue them in the same way that you did other consumers? Well, no, because you didn't want to do so in such a public space, because you didn't want to risk rejection amongst white consumers. And that is something that, well, vestiges of it are still there today, but that's something that many in the industry didn't actively push back against until the 1970s. In the 1970s, for example, so 50 or so years ago now, 1950s, 1970s, for example, we can see studies of academics, people like myself, people like those who would work somewhere like the University of Illinois, studying and researching what happens, right? What happens when we put an African American in an ad? What happens, right? What do white consumers do? Because, in terms of race, for most of this nation's history, it's been about black and white, by and large, is how it's been, outside of some other regional places and spaces. And so testing that, examining what would happen. Are white consumers going to run away, right? And it sounds nonsensical to us today, but it wasn't until that thinking people, logical people, would sit down and have real conversations about, give you a parallel. What's going to happen? What are people going to do when we put an African American on TV to deliver the news? Right? This is back in the time when we had, three major networks, and there was the social commonality was for people to gather to watch the evening news. But where are they watching the evening news? They're watching the evening news in their home. They're sitting in their living rooms. They're sitting in their own intimate spaces to consume this news. And now you've essentially placed a black person in their home through the TV, yes, but you've put them in the home. Well, what are they going to do? Are they going to turn you off? Are they going to reject you? Are they going to run away? Are they going to run to your competition? So, that's some of the depth of race that's been part and parcel of whether it's, various forms of media, marketing, advertising, and the like.
So, today it seems absurd that there was a time where people would feel alienated or run away if they saw something of this sort, like you mentioned an African-American news person, let's say. But what was it during, I would say, the late 20th century that normalized this, or that made people, or how did we reach where we are right now?
The simple answer is money. Money wins. Money and pressure. Right? In the 1960s, for example, early to mid 1960s, a lot of pressure on advertising agencies, a lot of pressure on corporations, because one of the things that we have to recognize is advertising is a particular form of communication, but it's also a ubiquitous form of communication. It's everywhere. It's only been increasing ever since the start of the 20th century. So it's outdoor, it's in print, it's in our magazines, our newspapers, our televisions, on our radios, what have you. It gets into our digital spaces. And so it's this ubiquitous form of communication. It's there for all to see. And so one of the things that took place in the early to mid 1960s is African-American activists go and they say, okay, one of the things that has to happen is that the image of African-Americans, right? The image of African Americans has to begin to shift. In addition to everything else that we're doing, in addition to our pushes for civil rights, social rights, economic rights, and the like, one of the things that they recognized was the value of image, right? The value and the power of image. And so one of the things that had to happen was you had to, and what they said to corporations is, you have to use your advertising, or we want you to use your advertising to help normalize the image of African Americans in the United States. And so what does that mean? Well, when you make advertising in places, or when you create scenes in advertising, tableaus in advertising, a couple of housewives discussing laundry detergent or something along those lines, in scenes where the races, as they would say, I'll use the terms of the time, in places where the races already come together, that baseball game, football game, people in the stands, street corner in New York, large urban city, place like Chicago, in places where those races already come together, they're already interacting with one another. Show those scenes in your advertisements, right? It's basic, but it's the beginnings of that normalization of African Americans, showing them not necessarily something to be avoided, but just as people who have the same kind of worries and concerns and interests in advertisements that other people do. African Americans wash their clothes, put them in a laundry detergent commercial. African Americans go to fast food restaurants, put them in a fast food commercial. So utilize advertising for a broader social concern or a broader social impact by placing them in the advertisements. And again, it seems like something that would be easily recognized or immediately desired, but it took pressure from civil rights activists. It took the threat of boycotts. It took government. It took and still takes government intervention, because again, the worry is, what are other consumers going to do? As well as just a general desire, general malaise that comes from wanting to keep on doing business as you're doing business. Well, it works for us this way. Let's just keep doing it this way. But that way, if you will, was far too restrictive.
So you mentioned that one of the first advertising, where advertising came from, was 3,000 years ago, way early. And you can even say that if you say that, let's say the Bible was the first recollection of history, you could say that the snake was the first, probably the first, I don't know, the first event in recorded human history that the snake was able to convince Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge, something like that, right? Because they use a form of communication as a way to convince people. So something I'm interested in knowing your answer to would be, what's been, advertising has changed in so many ways, but what are some of the common principles, common things that do not change throughout the history and that will not change in the future?
That's a great question. One of the things that I say in my class is that advertising is new in its methods. It's new in its methods, but it's old in its ideas, right? There's always been, or there's always an evolution of how we do it, the method of advertising, right? Going from, pictures and images in Roman ruins to words, phrases, long copy sentences, through delivery through newspapers, delivery through magazines, delivery on radio, delivery on television, the digital space that we have now. So there's always been a new way of doing it. There's always been a new method. We're constantly talking about new methods of reaching people. But the ideas remain the same. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is get to people in a way that they find intriguing, interesting, what have you, or of meaning to them, and sell them on a good concept, service, an idea, a person, what have you. So those things remain the same, utilizing persuasive communications to move people to action. That's what advertising is, and that's what advertising will long be until our computers are deciding for us what we should buy, and we just leave it alone. But even in that, somewhere in there will be an interaction, a human interaction that says, this is what I want, this is what I desire, this is what I aspire to. And advertising's goal is to connect the manufacturers of those products with people's interests, their tastes, their desires, what have you. That's the link, the B2B link and the B2C link, the business to consumer link and the business to business link. Advertising sits in that middle space between translating what it is that a company, a person, or what have you has for sale in a way that makes sense to consumers, in a way that consumers can care about. Because that's the thing about advertising. When we have a product, when we have a camera here, we have a variety of cameras here in front of us. We have cameras, right? If you're into cameras, if you're into technology, there's a host of things that you could possibly talk about that separates this Lumix camera from a Sony camera, from a Canon camera, from a Nikon camera, and those things would be true. But those things aren't necessarily things that consumers care about, right? Think about it this way. A lot of old copywriters would put it this way. People don't want to make a hole. They don't want to make a hole. What they want to do is hang a picture, right? And if you're a manufacturer of drills or of hammers or of nails, part of what our job is to help you understand that people don't want to just make a hole, or they don't just want to place a nail. What they want to do is hang a picture. And not only do they want to hang a picture, but if we dig deeper, we find out what they want to do is show their family, or what they want to do is show their taste, or what they want to do is show people who come into their home that they visited Paris last year or something like that. So it's that understanding of consumers. And if you're just a manufacturer, and I don't say that lightly, but if you're the manufacturer, you might not understand that consumer want. What I really want is this. You might want to tell me about your hammer and where it's made and how you make the handle and your research and design, and all those things might be important, but not to the group of consumers that you're talking to. My job is to help you understand the group of consumers that you're talking to and what it is that they actually want, and that ideally is that human part.
So in a way, advertising is about figuring out what people want.
Absolutely.
So which leads us to ask you the question, like how do we know what people want? Because it's like you said, it's very hard, because people will tell you, okay, I'm going to buy this portrait as a way to put the cameras in there. Mm-hmm. But sure, that's part of the reason, but the reason is because they might have been to Paris and they want to show people they went to Paris. Mm-hmm. And the reason why they went to Paris in the first place was to show people. Mm-hmm. And so in a way, how do we know what people want? Because if we can have, okay, I think you may want to buy a certain camera. Mm-hmm. Why do you want to? And you tell me, I want to buy this camera. But in reality, you may want the camera to take videos of your classes so you can put them on YouTube. Why do you want to do that? Okay, you want to help more people in the world to learn about advertising. Like that's the reason that you didn't, that you kind of subconsciously knew, mm-hmm. but you would never tell me that. Mm-hmm. So advertising is about like figuring out exactly what people want. Mm-hmm. How do we know what people want?
You anticipate the challenge of and the need of the profession, because it comes in the asking, it comes in the analysis, it comes in the questions, it comes in examining what arguments have been used to motivate people to action before, what has worked maybe for our competition. So there's a host of different questions and points of analysis, and we try to dig into as many possible details as we can. There's, some people go as far as digging, doing brain scans and things of that nature to find out what it is that stimulates people to take action. And there are a host of potential answers to that. And as much as we try to individualize advertising, which we do very much today, there's still that notion of I've got to find the want, but I've got to find it and the message in a large enough group to be profitable to me. Right? Because that's ultimately what it's about. I don't need to sell my product to everybody. I just need to sell it to a large enough group of somebodies to help me achieve the profit level that I want. Right? That's what's behind that notion of, finding your true fans. Because some people think, well, I need to sell my product to everybody. No, you don't have to sell your product to everybody. There might be the 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 people out there who love what it is that you have to sell, and you just have to reach, you have to talk, you have to maintain your connection with them. And if you do that, profitability will take care of itself. But the advertising and the learning comes in the analysis, it comes in the asking, it comes in the testing, it comes in the trying, it comes in the retesting, redesign, redelivery, redevise, and go at it again until you find that point, those points of nuance and those points of access that allow you to reach the people that you want to reach. But the thing is, you can't stop, right? You can't stop your analysis because we're always changing. Right? Your consumer base could always be changing. So your advertising argument is valid only as long as the people continue to receive it. Maybe they'll stick with that argument for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, but probably not. And so that's what your agency's job is to be that expert to help you understand your consumer base. You're the experts on the manufacture of your product and a whole host of other things that are connected to its, its logistics, its distribution, its design. But in terms of how it's to be sold, well, that's us. Because our job is to understand the people that you're trying to reach. Right? And that's what you've hired us for.
So, like, you already know that advertising has already touched like every sphere of life today, right? Mm-hmm. Every company that you see, if they want to sell their products, they know that they have to be good at advertising. And mm-hmm. companies are getting better and better at advertising. Everywhere we go, we see like we open YouTube. If you're just watching a video, we get like 2 or 3 advertisements. Mm-hmm. We're watching a podcast on Spotify, another advertisement if you have the free account, right? So mm-hmm. we have advertisement in every sphere of life. And it's all benefiting the company at the end of the day, right? What are advertisements for? It's like we talked about, it's capitalism at the end of the day. So mm-hmm. when does the company, or if a company stops and thinks about the ethical and the environmental impacts of that advertisement, or just if people keep buying product recklessly or mm-hmm. their product recklessly, like does a company stop and think about it?
Companies do, and companies will have, and companies are ultimately made up of people. Companies don't make decisions, right? We were talking about Microsoft earlier. Microsoft doesn't make decisions. People at Microsoft make decisions. So ultimately, that then move on behalf of the company. So ultimately, companies will make those decisions, but that line will be different for each and every person. That line will be different in terms of, how much do we give back to the community? How much do we practice ethical manufacturing processes? How much do we go beyond the legal or the regulatory standards of our industry, whether we're manufacturing coats or computer chips or cell phones, what have you? So that question is going to be answered almost as differently as it is amongst people. It's going to be answered differently based upon what is or is not profitable to the shareholders of that company, because that's the thing that we sometimes overlook. That at least in the United States, right, the law basically says that companies have to be administered in a way that's profitable to the shareholders, right? That's it. So I may want to do a thing, but if the shareholders like it, no, that doesn't really work for us, then the chances are that thing is not going to be done. So it's not to say that ethics do not come into it, because they absolutely do, but the line is fluid, and each company is going to find its own place and its own space on it. And the other thing is that we have to remember that in the media system that we have, and it's not to say that there can't be another media system, because there's multiple opportunities for different ones. But in the media system that we have, advertisements are just part of the trade-off, right? Because ultimately, think about it this way. You pay for access to YouTube, but unless you have YouTube TV, you don't actually pay for YouTube. You pay for access to Google, but you don't actually pay for Google. You pay for access to the various websites and the content and the blogs. We pay for access to our television shows, but we don't actually pay for the shows themselves necessarily. The trade-off is somebody wants to talk to us. Somebody wants to reach us. They want to sell us a, Flex Seal adhesive spray or something like that. And so they pay for that access. And in paying for that access, they help support the content. And then we get the content. And then our part of the role is to watch it as long as it's on. But then what do? We hit in the digital example, you hit the skip button as soon as possible. But every great once in a while, right? Every once in a while, you pause. You don't hit that skip button, and you watch just to see what happens. That's advertising, right? That's advertising. And so that's the trade-off. We get content, and that's been the trade-off. We get content. Back in the day, we got lower prices on magazines or newspapers, or we got radio shows, or we got to watch television shows, and the trade-off was somebody else is paying for the show, and I have to deal with their advertising. That's the modern media system. And if you can aggregate audience, I say this to my students, no matter what you've done, and no matter what you do, if you can aggregate an audience, sooner or later somebody is going to come along and ask you for access to that audience and want to pay you for access to that audience. Right? Now, whether or not you choose to take the money is going to be up to you. But if you've got a large enough audience, somewhere somebody's going to want to try to reach them, to sell them something.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned some of the products like Google, Facebook, all these products, they're free. Mm-hmm. And that's the only reason why they could be free. And these companies are not necessarily bad. They have, like you said, they have these audiences that are selling that in order to provide this service to as many people as possible for free. And if we didn't have the business model, that would not be possible. Perhaps we have a different business model, maybe, but people, they talk bad about these companies all the time. And in reality, yes, they're doing this trade-off, but they're making these products available for as many people as possible. You mentioned something interesting. That was true fans. What do you mean by that?
That's it. Oh, yeah. True fans. True fans are the people that are going to buy your product almost just as a matter of habit, right? Your true fans are those who you can think of them as the type of people who follow a rock band from city to city, or at least every time they show up in their city, they always go to see their concert. They have knowledge, they have insight, they have awareness of the group, and they are totally into that group. And as long as that group continues to meet their needs, they'll remain a fan, and they are the ones that buy the records. They're the ones that buy the merchandise. They're the ones that watch the specials when we come on to television or in the digital space. Those are our true fans. They go out of their way to consume our content. Now, a fan, well, they might occasionally watch. They might pick up an album here or two. They might go on iTunes, what have you, and they might buy a song. True fan buys the whole album. True fan always comes to the concert. True fan always has the merchandise. True fan advocates on our behalf. True fan talks to others about us, right? So they're contributing their time, they're contributing their attention, they're contributing their money to what it is that we do, right? So that true fan, that super user, if you will, they're loyal, right? They're advocates, they spend, and they might be enough to profitability. So if I have 100 people who each spend $100, or I have 100 people who each spend $10, I'd rather have the 100 who spend the 100, right? That can be the difference in the true fans. Or if I have 200 people that spend $10, I still haven't equaled that 100 who spend the 100. 300 people who spend $10, I still haven't equaled that. But I just gave you 100 who spend 100. And so sometimes people and creators and media types, they can be so quick to want to search out numbers, right? Well, we have this many hits, this many views, but okay, well, how much of that turned into capital? How much of that turned into cash? You're so much in a hurry to aggregate and get a large number of users, a large number of consumers. Well, you've overlooked how much of those consumers spending? How much did it cost me to acquire those consumers? What's that return on investment? And when we search out and we think about the true fans, the actual number that we need, now we might want large numbers, but the actual number that we need to reach the level of profit that we want might be much smaller than we think because of how much those true fans would actually spend if we have the right argument, if we have the right merchandise, if we have the right group of things to reach them.
Yeah, I first learned about this idea about 4 years ago, and this idea comes from Kevin Kelly, which is the founder of Wire Magazine, and he applied this idea to freelancers and people in the internet making content and stuff like that, and he said that you need about 1,000 true fans as a way for you to make about $100K a year with people who would buy everything you do, like you said, concerts, everything. And recently, a partner at a venture capital firm from California, this lady, she changed the model, and she would even argue that only with 100 people, then you would even have, with 100 true fans, you would be able to have a profitable and career where you are able to, do what you want in a way that you don't have to focus on the number, but perhaps you can focus more on the quality. Because once you have that number, you don't need that much to improve your quality of living.
Yeah, so it's always a question of how, to your point, it's a question of how and where and why do you want to try to scale, right? Do you want to try to scale to be, up with the Microsoft and the Apples and the Facebooks of the world? Well, there's different things that you may have to do. But if it's a side hustle, if it's a freelance gig, if it's something that you're doing, if it's another stream of income for you, then the number of fans that you need, the number of consumers, the number of customers that you need right, if you do your analysis right, might be much smaller. And then that's going to change your argument. Then that's going to change your approach necessarily, because you recognize, I'm not trying to talk to everybody. I'm not trying to talk to everybody who wants to take a class in filmmaking. I'm trying to talk to a certain group of somebodies who will have an interest in what it is that I have to sell. And helping you understand that argument, let alone deliver that argument, is what advertising and marketing to a lesser extent is what advertising is for.
In your experience in this industry, have you come across a company where its advertising has done more harm than good to the society?
I think the tobacco companies would be first on that list, because of what tobacco companies knew about the harmful nature and the harmful impact of their products, and how long they worked behind the scenes, and in some cases in front of the scenes, how long they worked behind the scenes to keep that knowledge from people, or to tamp down that knowledge from people. We don't think about cigarette smoking as much anymore, because it's dwindled significantly in terms of it being a habit, at least in the United States. But for a very long time, some of our largest and most present and most visible advertisers were marketing a product that was harmful, to you. So I would put our cigarette manufacturers at the top of the list anytime.
So how do you regulate this? But it's at the discretion of the company how they want to advertise their product, and there's nothing overlooking them or saying okay, if you do this, it's going to be bad for the people who are watching this, or it's going to affect people in the negative way. Do you think there should be some, I don't know, maybe legal regulation or some authority in every company that overlooks that this advertisement is ethically, I would say, correct for the society? Or
well, you raise a good question. The thing with ethics is that ethics are often personally defined.
Right.
I've talked with a number of people who were entrepreneurs in the advertising space, African American primarily, and I often ask each one of them, are there products that you wouldn't sell? Are there products that you wouldn't take your talent, your creativity for doing advertising? Is there talent? Are there products during your career, because many of them are retired now, are there products during your career that you wouldn't sell? Some of them answered tobacco. I wouldn't sell tobacco products. Others might answer alcohol. I wouldn't sell alcoholic beverage products, based on their own personal ethics, their own code of ethics. Others said, is the product legal? Yes. That's my boundary. That's my standard. If the product has not been outlawed, if the society has not decided that the product is negative enough, it's dangerous enough, it's hampering enough that it should be outlawed, then that means it's legal for people to buy. If it's legal for people to buy, then that means to me it's legal to sell, and I'm okay with selling it. So those ethics, again, are gonna vary from person to person, and they are gonna vary from agency to agency and company to company. And each person, and I talk to students about this a lot, each person will have to decide, well, what am I going to do if I go out there into the work world, if I go into the work world and I'm asked to use my talents to sell something that I find ethically challenging, what am I going to do? And I said, you'll have to address that in each instance. Right? Maybe you'll ask to be moved to another team. Maybe you'll ask to be taken off of the product, but what if the answer is no, right? And the answer that comes back is, if you won't work on this product that is a client of our agency, then you are fired. Well, now what do you do? That's where the proverbial rubber meets the road, when you're actually confronted with that individual choice that's going to impact your individual life rather than as a broader kind of social concern.
Okay, so the flip side. Have you, or can you talk about a company which has prioritized its ethical, I would say, repercussions on the society over profits when it was advertising?
Over profits is a difficult one, but I would say that, companies over the last 20 to 25 years, this concept of social responsibility, we've kind of ebbed and flowed with how much we prioritize it. Give you a quick example. A good example might be some of the cosmetics companies now, with their representation of body type, their representation of body image. Some countries in Europe are a little further along than than the United States in that they disallow certain types of digital manipulation, right? You can't take a picture of a model and then, necessarily make her slimmer using digital technologies or change the wrinkles in her face or what have you. That's just not allowed. And so getting away from those types of images that show us depictions of the human body that just aren't achievable. Right. And so certain companies have gotten away from that. Dove, for example, a number of years ago with their Real Beauty campaign, in which the idea is we will show women as they are. We'll show women of multiple body types, of multiple body sizes, and the like. We're seeing more of that even here in the last couple of years. I'll be interested to see how much it continues. I've seen more diverse images in advertisements. A company like Target tries to do a lot of that. More images of people, for example, in wheelchairs. More images of people who have maybe they're missing parts of their body. Right? Those people exist in our society. We just hadn't seen them in our advertising because the idea of advertising is we present perfect people. Perfect people in perfect situations that are always happy, engaged with our product. Well, perfect doesn't exist. Right? Doesn't. So I would put companies, some of the cosmetics companies, into that space. They get deservedly criticized, but I think that their hearts were in the right place. But some of the alcoholic beverage companies that supported some of the We Card things that tried to curb underage alcohol consumption, I think that we could put some of those in there. But some of that's also been reactionary. It's been reactionary to public pressure. It's been reactionary to threats of regulation. But whether the horse walks to the water or you drag the horse to the water, as long as they drink, I think that's your primary concern, so to speak. But the cosmetics companies would be amongst the first on that list for me.
You mentioned that advertising is a form of communication. And communication tells us exactly what we're thinking, what advertising is a form of communication that tells us about the state of society. And you could argue that, in the 1970s and 1950s, that reflected what we as a society value or didn't value or we were not thinking about. Like today, like you said, we see a greater diversity in the form of advertising communications, and we see that as a society, we seem to care about those things more. And we always look at the past and we say, oh my God, these people were horrible, X, Y, and Z. But I'm wondering what you think. What are some of the things that we as a society are not doing enough of, or things that we're doing right now that we will come back in the future? People from the future will be like, oh my God, how was that even possible?
I think, the one you raise a good question. I think the number one that I think about is how much did you or did you not think about the impact of your technological consumption on our planet, right? How much did you think about what happened to the computer monitor that you replaced and threw away? How much did you think about the cell phone? How much did you think about the tablet? How much did you think about the laptop? And that, I think, is going to be one of the number one things that they will come back and ask us about. Our children and our children's children will ask us about, you guys were just using this technology like it was disposable. You didn't think about its recycling. You didn't think about its impact on the planet. You didn't think about where it went when you disposed of an old CRT tube monitor. Why not? Did you think that it would just disappear? And I think that's one of the number one things that they'll come back and ask us, let alone obviously things that are maybe a little more top of mind, like the impact of the consumption of fossil fuels. But in terms of what the average consumer kind of touches every day, the technology that we touch every day, and when we replace it, how much do we think about that? Because I think that they will ask, what did you do with your new phone that your old phone couldn't do? Did you change something that you did? Well, no, I still make calls and surf Facebook and Instagram and, posted videos on TikTok. Well, didn't your new phone do that? Didn't your old phone do it? Well, yeah, but it had been 2 years. Well, then I think they'll look at us and ask us questions about waste because of the potential negative impact on our planet, right? Because this stuff has to go somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's fundamentally a question of business models, about fixing that, and also about incentives. I often come back about the idea of incentives, and I think that's where we can fix all the problems. But that's a That's not something I need to think more about. So Mark Andreessen, which was the guy who went here. He was a grad student at the University of Illinois, and he was the first person who developed the first web browser as we know it today. And in the 1990s, he usually used to work at the NCSA. And something that was interesting about him is that he wasn't the best programmer per se, or he wasn't the guy who invented the best technology per se either. There were a lot of browsers out there already. And when he invented Mosaic, which is the browser he created, and then Netscape, he didn't really, the technology he created wasn't something that he invented out of nowhere. A lot of the things were already there, and something he was able to figure out, and something that he says, now it's kind of common knowledge in Silicon Valley, is that, make something people want. How do you do that? You talk to your users. And that's something that Mark Andreessen did all the time. Talk to your users, talk to your users, talk to your users. He would go on the discussion forums, he would go everywhere where the future users would be at and talk to them. But talking to them, it's a messy process.
Yes.
Very messy, because we don't really know what they want, which again goes back to the question we were talking about earlier. And you mentioned something about brain scans. I kind of wrote a book with this neuroscientist in about the future of marketing. And a lot of the things, I learned a lot about, the different MRIs and all of these machines that tell you about the brain scans, about what they want. And even then, we still don't know, because there's something in our brains that doesn't really reflect. It's kind of a part of our brain that we cannot access fully aware. But it's still, I do think there's a methodology that people in the advertising industry have used in order to know what people want. Again, long preface, long context, but I think it's important in order to understand the question. So how do we talk to the users in a way that we can accurately know what they want?
I think that's going to vary for each and every user base. It's going to vary for the types of questions. I think it's going to vary for the types of technology. And sometimes the answers that you might get back, they might seem very, very logical. They might seem to be the exact thing to apply, and it turns out that they're not. And that's the gap between, or the division between the human and the machine, right? The machine, you put in the right input, you can predict the output that you're going to get necessarily. With the human, you can ask me directly, and I can tell you directly. Then you can give me what I told you that I want, and I tell you, no, that's not it. That's the human part, right? That's the unpredictable part that changes in the moment, that changes in the second, and that's the part that you just can't get to. And so you go through your analysis, and you make your best guess, and you deliver, and you test as often as you can. But ultimately, at some point, there's going to be the part where you put it out there, and you're going to say, okay, I'm done with it. Here's the thing that I have for you, and that's going to be the moment that you see. Right? That's going to be the moment that you see, do the people actually want it? And until you reach that final point, there's always going to be trepidation that you do or that you don't have that answer, right? Because you're still dealing with human beings, and as human beings, we change in the moment. We change from day to day, we change from week to week, we change from month to month. And so when you asked me, I didn't lie to you as a consumer, somebody that you're testing and you're analyzing as a consumer. You asked me. I didn't lie to you. I didn't hide my answer from you. You asked me a basic direct question. I gave you a basic direct answer, and you gave me back what you thought was based around my answer. And then I tell you, no, that's not it. That's dealing with humans, baby. That's dealing with human beings.
You said it depends. How about I give you a more feasible scenario? Something like our show, that we're making videos, and you know what it's about, and you can understand more or less what we're doing here. Again, we're not trying to do this to get famous or anything. We're doing this for ourselves, to have fun. But let's say we want to make this as big as possible, and we want to make money, we want to do all these things. Again, that's not our purpose, but let's say we're trying to make debts, and you are member, we hire you as our advertising agency. What would you tell us?
First off, I'd say, well, who are you after? Right? Who's your ideal fan?
Can you know that?
you can project, you can try, you can say, for example, okay, we're a couple of show hosts, we're a couple of young guys, we go to school at a university in the Midwest. These are our interests. These are the things that we would like to become known for. These are the things that we would like to become famous for. Maybe we want to talk about technology connected to sports. Let's just use those. Technology connected to sports gambling. Okay, well, our show is going to be about technology connected to sports gambling. Okay, well, then who would be interested in such a thing? Would it be gamblers? Would it be people who want to design technology? Would it be people who are designing the things that are being used inside stadiums? Or is it going to be people that are using the things that are designed as part of the ticket buying process?
Right.
So who are we talking to? Are we talking to other potential business owners? Are we talking to other potential consumers of the gambling technologies? And then based upon that, we begin to identify potential audience. We begin to identify them based upon things like age and demographics, maybe how much they buy, how much they're willing to spend. If we said it's on the consumer side, are these going to be people who you envision as the type who throw caution to the wind? Right? That I'm going to bet and bet and bet until I get back in the black, right? I'm not going to end my week in the red, right? I'm not going to end my week on a loss. Okay, that's going to be different than the person who says, I've got a specific budget for the week. I'll only gamble $25 a week regardless. That might be a totally different audience than the one who says, whatever happens, every week has to end in the black, or my budget isn't $25 a week. My budget's $500 a week. My budget's $5,000 a week. So as we begin to identify those groups that you're after, certainly as part of that analysis, ideally we would have some concept as to what's the most profitable segment in there, right? Is it the person who spends, the $500 every once and again, or is it the person who's going to spend $10 a day, $10 a game? Is it the type of person who's going to watch multiple sports? They're going to watch baseball, they're going to watch golf, they're going to watch basketball, and they're going to want to find a way to bet on all of them. All of those questions would be part and parcel of it, let alone analyzing your competition to see where your competition was at. So if it's about being as large as possible, then we get into things like popularity and design. But if it's about being, identifying that most profitable group, and you say, what we really need, what we're really after is about not necessarily the number of people, but this is what we're after. We want enough income, maybe it's just to pay for the production of the show, right? And then with that analysis, we can begin to say, okay, then this is who we want to go after, right? That we might find the most profitable segment for you all is going to be is being able to talk to and interest people who design the technology that connect sports and gambling, let's just say, in my example here.
And I think that's something you learn, but oftentimes the most successful people do the complete opposite. How do you explain such things? Like I can think of, for example, let's keep it to shows because we're doing shows. Like the most successful podcaster show, whatever, that has, all the CNN, Fox News, all of them combined, mm-hmm. they don't even reach to that level. Like Joe Rogan, mm-hmm. he is by far the most successful podcaster. Everything. Mm-hmm. He was not thinking whether the most profitable thing. He was not thinking of any of that. How do you explain such thing?
I'll say it this way. Some of the most, and there's all manner of ways to define success. There's all manner of ways to reach it. But some of the most successful people that I found have said, whatever it is that I started, whatever it is that I did, whatever it is that I do, I didn't get in it to get rich. I didn't get in it to get known. I got into it because there was something that I wanted to see in the world, and I just wanted to put it out there. Whether it's a point of view, whether it's a style of advertising, whether it's a design for cameras, whether it's websites, whatever the case may be, there was just something that I wanted to see in the world, and I delivered it, right? And the other factor is we can try to analyze people's success in as much depth and as many degrees as we can possibly want, but with some of them, there's just going to be something that, even if we decide on what their formula was, even if we put forth their exact formula, we just won't have it. It's a clumsy example, but I'll use it anyway. They're Kardashians, right? Now, we could sit back and analyze them from the O.J. Simpson trial onward, and what they did and their family, and where they appeared, and all this different stuff. We can say, well, okay, well, we're going to do that too to try to achieve the same level of popularity. And even with all of that analysis, there's some ephemeral thing, whether it's timing, whether it's the society of the moment, whether it's the gap that they fit in the space in which they fit in it, and the time in which they fit in it, that we just can't replicate, right? And therefore, we have to find our own gap. We have to find our own niche. We have to find our own angle, our own approach. And I think for some, that's where the passion comes in, right? That's where there's something I want to see in the world. So therefore, I put my work and my effort and my money and my time behind it, because that's going to be the thing that sustains us when it gets hard. Because again, Joe Rogan is one of those, 10-year overnight successes, right? I'm at it. I'm out there. I'm putting out content, and nobody's listening. Nobody's paying attention. But I want to see it in the world. So I keep doing it, and I keep doing it, and I keep doing it, and I keep doing it. And somewhere along the line, it happens, right? But that's the ephemeral part. That's the human part. Because when we're dealing with people, sometimes, man, we just can't predict. For as much insight and technology and analysis that we have, at some point we're just dealing with folks. We're just dealing with people, and we can't fully understand why they moved in the way that they did.
So, would you agree that the advertising, studying advertising is about learning from the successes?
Absolutely, and the failures,
How come?
Because you can, in analyzing failure, you can at least try to understand things from the other side, which is maybe they tried, maybe all of their analysis, right? Maybe they didn't do anything wrong. Their timing was wrong, or they asked the wrong question. I'll give you a quick example that I use in my class. Most of my class, one of my classes, it's called Classic Campaigns. Most of them are about business successes, advertising successes, or advertising campaigns for products that succeeded and then went on to great heights. One of them, though, is about a failure, and that's the failure of New Coke. Back in 1985, mid-1980s, when Coke, in their misguided efforts to keep up with Pepsi-Cola, decided to change their formula. They did everything right? They actually had a good formula, I remember. They actually had a good formula, but the thing that they couldn't account for was how are consumers, or they didn't account for because they couldn't, how will consumers react when we not only change the old formula of Coca-Cola, but we tell them we are taking away the old formula, right? We think we've made a product that's better. All of our testing tells us that it's better. When we test people, when we test the formula, people say that they like it, on and on and on and on and on. So everything we did was right. The thing that we were hampered by, in part, is that in our testing, we couldn't ask people, well, how are you going to feel about this if the old formula of Coca-Cola is not available? Because we're trying to keep the secret, right? Because we don't want anybody to know that we're thinking about changing the unchangeable formula of Coca-Cola. So in our testing, I can't ask you if we were in a focus group right now. I can't say, well, how would you feel if this was the formula and the old one wasn't even available anymore? Because you might take that and go on the street, hey, everybody, they're thinking about getting rid of the old formula of Coca-Cola. And then the cat's out of the bag. So since we couldn't ask that question, when we do try to remove the old formula and we get the consumer response that we get, which is largely negative, now we have to decide what to do. So we did everything right, but one condition was such that we couldn't ask what turns out to be the most important question, right? So studying the failures allows us to see things like that. And it's not to say that you come up with a great answer on, well, they should have told people that they're going to take away the old formula. Well, then what if the secret gets out? Right? Then you lose all your potential marketing muscle and everything that you were planning to do in that regard. So studying the failures at least illuminates that. At least it offers us another way to look at a challenge, to look at a problem, and to decide what parts of it we're going to apply to our own business.
Interesting. And so something I also think about sometimes is that there's a lot of survivorship bias in a lot of these studies, and
a lot of what bias? I'm sorry.
Survivorship bias, which comes from like World War II and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so in a lot of these things, there's a lot of survivorship bias, and with not only with advertising, but a lot of like business and marketing, a lot of these fields where it's hard to either falsify or support a hypothesis because of of what you said. And success, in a way, if I tell you, hey, in order to be successful, you need to wear a leather jacket. The thing is, I just gave you my lottery ticket, and the lottery ticket is not going to work for you because I won the lottery ticket. That's not to say that wearing leather jackets isn't going to make you successful. Or that's not to say that studying advertising and the past successes and failures isn't going to give you some insight about advertising or marketing or business or whatever you're studying. The thing is, a lot of the focus is about lottery tickets, whether that is lottery ticket for failures or successes. And as you described, that's a flawed way to learn because you never know. It's like you said, like the most successful people, they don't even try. They're just making something because they want to, period. How do you think about the question? How should I think about the question of, I know advertising is important and perhaps, or I know business is important, but perhaps the best way to become a business and doing business isn't to go to study business school, or isn't to, if I want to become the best advertising person, isn't to go to advertising school. How do you think about such a question?
I think I would ask people who say that, they say, well, Joe Rogan didn't this or this person didn't that. I would ask, well, how much do you actually know about them? And how much have you actually told them? How much have they actually told you about themselves? Have they told you about all of their struggles, right? Or have they only told you about the portion from which their success first emerged, right? So I was at it for 10 years. My emergence came in year 6. So the only place in space from which I tell my origin story is from year 6 forward. So I never, so we never hear about years 0 through 5. And so I would say that to say, you can analyze a thing to death, right? You can analyze a thing to the point that you don't even start, right? I'll give you a quick nonsensical example. I started a new video game the other day. It's a role-playing game. So, you design your own character and the like. It's an older game, but I just started playing it. So you design your own character. So you can design this character in a bunch of different ways. We've got, you can be a lizard, you can be a dwarf, you can be a human, you can be a this, you can be a that. And if in choosing that, you can be a wizard, you can be a fighter, you can on and on and on and on and on. You can get paralyzed by just, do I want to make a dwarf rogue, or do I want to make a human fighter or a human archer? No, I want to make a lizard. You can get so paralyzed in your analysis that you look up and you realize, I've been at this game for 3, 4, 5 days. I've spent 8, 10, 12 hours on it, and I actually haven't started it. All I've done is design and redesign and start over again and again and again and again, trying to make the perfect character. So you can analyze a thing to death, but it's not to say that the analysis isn't valid, but it's what you do as you take the analysis yourself and then take action, right? Because in taking anybody's kind of origin story or analysis or area of study, all that you can do is learn from it and then decide which parts of it apply to you. Decide which parts of it apply to your business. Decide which parts of it that you can make use of in trying to move forward in the way that you want to move forward. Right? Not in the way that they moved forward. And that's not to say that their story isn't valuable, but what they would tell you likely is the way that I did it, you can take parts of that, but it might not have the same meaning for you. Because let's just say somebody like a Joe Rogan, well, when I first emerged, there was, I don't even know how many podcasters, for example, there are right now, but there was a time at which, having a blog, let's say, well, you could count blogs in the dozens. I sometimes chuckle. I was actually in one of the rooms in our college where we have some old and classic, just classic books that people have put in this one room, and I ran across one that was the book of the internet. Right? There was a time at which we felt we could encapsulate the whole of the internet, and it was true. We can encapsulate everything that's available on the internet in a book. Well, if you started then and you were able to get in on that particular ground floor, well, then maybe your opportunity for success was much different than what mine is now. When there are billions of places on the internet now. But what can you learn from my story? Maybe it's only a tiny, 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 tiny piece. but it could be the valuable piece that helps to carry you forward, right? But the thing is not to get paralyzed by saying, to your point about lottery ticket, that I have to do it your way, right? Well, why are they successful? Well, of course they're successful. He wore a leather jacket, and they don't know anything about, the effort that you went through to try and getting guests and learning to operate cameras and deciding upon your design and the flow of the show and all these places and spaces where you were putting out stuff and putting out content and did it for years and nobody was paying you any mind. And then somewhere along the line, you hit upon the formula that you needed and you're off and running.
I don't want to keep going on this too long, but I do want to ask you, you said, okay, perhaps, it's not about, learning exactly what they tell you. Like, again, advertising, you learn about Coca-Cola, Apple, all these companies, very successful companies, and you learn about the failure successes, all of them. And perhaps not about, okay, whether you should have started or not. It's about learning about what to take from those. How do you do that? And even if you decide, okay, Coca-Cola did X, Y, and Z, I'm only going to take X, even then you don't know. So how can you learn about from first would be, how can you learn about what to take? And second, what would be some ways to not just copy, but also
Implement it?
not implement it, but also like think for yourself as you're creating new strategies?
One of the things I like to say too is, first we learn to imitate, right? First we learn to imitate, and then we learn to innovate. I learned to imitate. I learned what somebody else has done. I learned the design of their show. I learned where they set their cameras. I learned the things that they did, and I apply that, and that's how I start my growth. But then, as I start my growth, as I learn, then I decide how and where it is that I'm going to innovate. And that only comes, to your point, that only comes from taking what I learn and trying to take action on it to see now which parts of it matter to me, now which parts of it have an impact on my life. It's akin to somebody telling you, well, this is how your resume should be designed. Well, okay, all right, well, you tell me I should put stuff in this order, my paper should be this color, it should be, the design should be like this, but not like that. Okay, I tried that. I did what you told me to do. I didn't get the jobs that I wanted. So I redesigned it, right? So I tried the thing that I learned. And if it worked for me, maybe I continue forth with it. If it did not, or even if it worked, but not in the way that I wanted it to work, then I decide to innovate in the ways that start to make sense for me. But that only comes from trial and error, trial and success. It only comes from the actual doing. And that's back to my point earlier about analysis. Sometimes people they think that, or they presume that, if I just take enough time to figure the thing out, right, and apply and know the order of steps that I should go through, then that has to equal success. And that's just not it, right? At some point, you have to release the thing to people, if people whom you're selling to, you have to release the thing to people and see how they respond, and then take their response and either decide what it is that you're going to do with it from there. So I film a show, I create a show, then I release episodes, and then I go talk to my audience. Right? I go talk to people, or I look at other shows that maybe are similar to mine in terms of content, what have you. And I analyze, maybe I imitate, maybe I decide to innovate, but I keep working, I keep moving, I keep trying. Right, and that's the thing. That's the pressure. That's how I take what I learned from school, what I learned about learning, and now it's my opportunity to apply it in the space that I'm in.
Yeah, I think a possible solution that that we've both learned from talking to people like you is that the people who have the most fun, the people who are the happiest, and the people who you can just tell the excitement in their eyes, these people are doing things because they want, because they're not doing a project so they can get a job. They're not doing X club to put on their resumes. They're doing something because they want. And, sometimes they are successful and sometimes they're not. But I think something I've learned over the years of my very young life is that, if you want to, let's say, if you want to become a filmmaker, there's no need to do Y. Just do X. Just become a filmmaker. Start making the video. Start doing the thing. And like you said, put the thing in the world that is not there yet. Put whatever you want to create in the thing that is not there yet. And for some reason, we're using our advanced abilities of our brain to make these old relationships. Okay, I do X to get Y, I do Y to get Z. When in reality, you wanted Z, just go get Z. Instead of like just all this like you're going here, you're going there, you're going there, like almost like a video game. Like you almost like, okay, I may get there, and like when you get there, like, oh, that's not what I wanted. So I think that's a big important lesson that I learned in my short life.
Yeah, well, you raised a good point, because it gets to, what sustains you in the times when it gets hard, right? The hardest work that many of us ever will do, we'll probably do by ourselves. Nobody will be around to see it. It'll just be us in our rooms, on a plane, whatever. Nobody will be there to see some of our hardest moments. And in those hardest moments, it's likely going to be your interest in the thing, or what that thing will do for you, that sustains you. I want to see this in the world. I want to see this exist. I want to have this film created. So you stay up and you keep editing and you keep editing and keep editing, so that you can get it in on time for some film festival. And so that's where that passion, that interest, that desire, those things come in. Right. That's where those things come in. And that's what helps to keep people pushing. And that's what helps to keep people, creating, especially when, because it's an act of courage to create something. It's an act of courage to create it and then release it to people, because what if people tear it to shreds? Well, if you have that belief in yourself, okay.
Very possible.
Man, you tore it to shreds. Okay. If they're constructive and they're tearing it to shreds, then there's probably something, when you get down from your feelings, there's probably something or some group of some things in there that is valuable to you that I can then take and I can apply. And then when I relaunch, I apply it and I see what happens. And the other thing is, though, as we said about true fans, maybe that person will always hate it, right? the hell, you were never going to be a fan anyway. Right? You were never going to be a fan anyway. I'll give you another quick example from advertising. The Got Milk campaign, if you've ever seen that one, right? When you got milk. And one of the things that they decided when they first launched that campaign was, instead of trying to get people who aren't drinking milk, right, and convince them about drinking milk, let's talk to the people who drink milk, and we just want to try to get them to drink more, right? We'll be a lot more efficient in talking to people that already do it, and remind them of all the places and spaces where milk is the perfect beverage. Cookies, cakes, what have you. So if you're not drinking milk anyway, whatever. We're not talking to you. Well, we hate your advertising. Well, do you drink milk? No. Well, then who cares what you think? All right? And sometimes I think when we start a thing, we want everybody to like us, and then we have to take a step back and recognize, you were never going to like my content. You were never going to like my content anyway, because it's not for you.
Yeah. It's funny, because that's how I think about like relationships or friend or even dating or whatever. Like, let's say like you want to date X person. Like if you try to fake, who you are, you're gonna get tired, and the person's gonna find out anyway. And if they like you, like they're gonna like you anyway. If you're you. And I feel like when you're making things, it's always about being yourself. If they like you, that's great, because they're really gonna like you. But if they don't, they really don't like you, that's fine. Yeah. Instead of like being like kind of in the middle ground of like no one really likes you, but no one really hates you. Like you're kind of like, you're there.
Right.
Like you want to have true friends. You want to have people who are there with you no matter what.
Right.
And I think that's something that it's always so counterintuitive. But again, if you do what you want, if you're true to yourself, these are things you would even have to think about. And I do want to ask you, but you mentioned, what sustains you in your hard moments and your challenges? What's that thing?
Ultimately for me, it's about getting a point of view out in the world that I want to see there. Back when I started my research on African Americans in the advertising industry, nobody had ever had researched it up to that point. And I remember asking one of my professors about that. And I said, if I look at the books that are on the history of advertising, I don't see African Americans there at all. He said, well, nobody's ever looked at it. And one of the things that I knew was that it is absolutely 100% demonstrable that any industry that you can think of, any walk of life that you can think of, African Americans have at least tried to be there. right? Now, whether or not they've succeeded or been able to is another question, but they've at least tried. And so for me, I wanted to at least know the story. If you tell me, well, there aren't really any African Americans in advertising, I at least wanted to know why, because I knew that there had to be a story there. One, I suspected that they had been there, but they had been overlooked by historians up to that point. But two, I thought to myself, well, there has to be a story there for the reasons that they're not, and I wanted to know why. So for me, it's and the great thing about being an academic is it has its own entrepreneurial aspects because you can investigate questions like that. I want to know why. I want to see that story out there in the world, and so for me, that's what it's been. I want to see a certain type of content or a certain type of perspective, or I want to be a certain type of academic. One of the things I often said when I was a graduate student is I want to pursue some topic or some area of study that people beyond the academy will want to hear about. I don't just want to talk to people that are in, professors like myself or that work at university. I want to be able to talk out there in the corporate space and studying what I've been able to study in a department like the one that I'm in. I'm able to do that. I spend a lot of time talking to advertising agencies. I spend a lot of time talking to advertising executives. I've had a wonderful opportunity to have a variety of corporate connections over my career that maybe I wouldn't have if I was in a more traditional history department. So I've been able to put that perspective out there, put that content out there that I wanted to see exist.
And that's a wonderful goal to have. And it's like you said, exactly what you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. You didn't see something in the world, and you work hard to make it happen.
Yeah.
There you go. You're perfect.
That's it.
What advice do you have for young people, high school and college, your students, as they enter this world?
I think the number one thing for me is always just start. Just start. Whatever it is that you want to see, whatever it is that you want to do, just start. And don't allow others' perceptions of what it is that you want to start cloud you or stop you. Again, do you want to see it exist? Yes. Do you have the passion and energy to try to make it exist? Whether you achieve it or not, do you have the passion and energy to try to make it exist? Yes. Then do it. Right? This is the time to do it. I often like to say to young people, this is the time in life to be selfish, right? You've probably got, not everybody's the same, but you've probably got fewer responsibilities now than as your life continues than you'll ever have. So this is the time to be selfish and pursue the things that you want to see exist, pursue the things that you want to do. So use this time in your life, use the resources that you have access to try to achieve the style and the place in life that you want to be. Right? Self-defined, that you've defined, right? Not that you've let anybody necessarily define for you. So think about what your own goals are, and man, go for them. Just go for them. Because that's the other thing. A lot of people want to be things, but when you talk to them, what you realize is you want to be that thing without having done the work to get to that thing, right? I often people will say to me, they ask me what I do, and I tell them, I'm a professor and I write books and things of that nature. They said, oh man, I'd love to write a book. I said, no. And you talk to them, and I realize, and I don't say this to people because you never want to try to crush a person's dreams, even if they're a little bit nonsensical for them. You don't actually want to write a book. What you want is a book that's written. Right? You want a book that's written, and you want to go on book tours, you want to stand up in front of people at the bookstore, and you want to do readings and stuff like that. But you don't actually want to go through the work to write a book. Right? So a lot of people, I want to start a podcast. Well, no, you want to be Joe Rogan. You want to be on a popular podcast where everybody's tuning in and you're getting on CNN, everybody's talking about you. So that's what you don't actually want to go through the work of, you go through your podcast and you see how many people are listening, and there's like 6, 2 of whom you're related to. You don't want to deal with that, right? So don't let people who talk a better game than you slow you down from what it is that you're doing. I got a path. That's the path. That's the path that I'm on, right? And that's the path that I'm going to pursue.
Yeah, it's always. I read once that the root of all evil is like money or any other thing. The root of all evil is actually the thought of your perception of yourself is not what you know it is, but the perception of others is high, And because of that perception, you live your life with that perception instead of what you think yourself as. So something I always think about that because it's easy to live in the perception of others. It's easy to live in the perception of, oh, he thinks I'm good, therefore I'm good, when in reality, you know you didn't do your homework, but the professor thinks I did my homework, so therefore I'm smart. When in reality, you know you didn't do anything, and you know you're not as good as a student as you are, and you know you're a bad person, but the perception of my professor here, he thinks I did great on the advertising essay, when in reality I didn't write it. So I think that it's always easy to get corrupted, because once you get corrupted once, it's so easy to become corrupted again.
Yeah, and I think that's very well said, and that's where it's one of the other pieces is you always have to be careful who you listen to.
Right.
Right. You always have to be careful how you listen to, because everything that people say isn't necessarily, whether they're calling it a compliment or not, it's not actually meant for good. Right. It's not actually meant to lift you. It's not actually meant to build you up in its own way. It's meant to hold you back, or it's meant to hold you down. Right. So again, that's where that kind of, it's not necessarily a singular focus, but I'll put it in those terms. That's where that singular focus of, and it might change over the course of your life. What is it that I'm after in this moment, in this space, at this time? Then that's what I'm pushing to. That's what I'm pushing towards, and that's what I'm going to pursue. And I'm just going to have to tamp out some voices, because they don't necessarily have that same vision for things that I do.
Yeah.
To end our show here, we do a section where we ask, we say a statement and we ask you underrated or overrated.
Okay.
So the one I'm very curious about is the Apple 1984 ad campaign. Overrated or underrated?
It's underrated, and I'll tell you why. It's underrated. Actually, it's funny. I just talked about this in class today. It's underrated because people don't so much think about the campaign as much as they think about the commercial. Right? The commercial is, the one running down and smashing the screen and all the on and on and on. They think about the commercial, and they don't recognize that there was a whole other campaign that became imitated and followed in the wake of that, with all of the other things that they did to help launch the Macintosh, point of purchase materials, direct mail materials, public relations materials, a whole host of other things that becomes an example for one of the followed and widely imitated marketing techniques for the next next decade and a half, which is integrated marketing communications. People drew a lot from that example of that Macintosh campaign as to how they incorporated things into the marketing and delivery of other products. So the 1984, if we think about it as a campaign, it's underrated. If we think about it as a commercial, it's maybe a little bit overrated. But if we think about it as a campaign, it's I would call it underrated.
That's a great way to. I haven't thought about it that way, but you're totally right. Is that sure? The ad, sure, maybe they sell a bunch of computers. I think they made a record from the ad or something, but it's completely underrated how much it impacted future ad campaigns in the whole industry. So that's I have not thought about it, and you're right. Like the way how it's just so it's just so disruptive in a way that
it wound up with a lot of talking value, right? It wound up being the thing, because the game that it played on, it only played once as a paid national ad, but it got so much other replay in so many other spaces, in movie theaters, on talk shows that talked about the ad or whatever. That used it as a metaphor for Orwell's novel 1984. So in that case, it's credit deserved. Overall, I call it still a little bit underrated.
The next one would be political speeches, such as MLK, I Have a Dream speech, or even Ronald Reagan, Tear Down This Wall, as a way to cause change. Because, there's many other speeches, or maybe, also in that category would be JFK, let's go to the moon. But those are, maybe also Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. We have a lot, but, politicians give speeches all the time. So those speeches, underrated or overrated?
I think they're still underrated because, we often see the value of speeches only in the rearview mirror. right? Because of the things that happen around them, the things that happen in their wake, the ultimate culmination of the Civil War with Lincoln's assassination, the ultimate destruction or the ultimate collapse of the Soviet Union in the wake of Reagan's speech, what have you. So I still think tied to their historical moments, again, seeing them in the rear view, I still think that they're underrated.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. And again, it's also, it talks about the idea of survivorship bias, because go ahead. You go ahead.
No, but those speeches still encapsulate a moment, right? They still mark a place and a space in time that really can be taken to encapsulate a feeling, right? Or some of Winston Churchill's great speeches, or FDR's. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Now, if the nation had failed to ever get out of the Great Depression, or if FDR had been a one-term president, maybe it wouldn't have the same meaning. But as a signature moment, and he had many, but as a signature moment in their career, these speeches become so associated with people, and it becomes so emblematic of a time that it's hard to consider them. For me, it's hard to consider them overrated.
And I think that's the point, right? Like, those moments are, even though they're instantaneous, if people keep coming back to it or think about it even at a later stage, you know that it was a successful effort, or you can say it was a good campaigning effort, or like successful advertising. Just pretty interesting, if you think.
And it's, again, they come to mark moments in time,
right?
When there were probably hundreds or thousands of speeches given when he said the same year that he said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But given what happens in their wake and the way that people kind of pull themselves and move themselves through the Depression and the like, it just becomes emblematic of a time, and it becomes a thing that we can continually turn back to and we can face in tough times. And as an emblematic moment, it reminds us, if we think about it at a nation level, it reminds us of a moment in which the nation had to push through a great economic crisis, and ultimately, eventually, with a war on the backside, of course, eventually they made their way through. So ideally gives people hope that, okay, and whatever our present moment is that has us turning back to that past moment, that we can do the same.
I'm sure that when the pandemic happened and the lockdowns and everything, I'm sure you had a lot of insights about how things were being set. For instance, when the first pandemic, in March 2020, people were saying, hey, like, don't buy masks, it's not necessary, and everything. Even ex-presidents and big political figures and people important in society were saying, don't wear masks and everything. And, the reason why, because we wanted to have enough supply for the healthcare workers, and that's a way of how people did that. And then there were the vaccines. There were a lot of things. How it was, even now, like, there's a bunch of mixed evidence with masks and vaccines and everything. All of that, all of the advertising campaigns, because there were people behind those statements, where there were people and agencies and ad companies and everything behind the decisions. Underrated or overrated?
I feel like we're still living in that moment, and so it's hard to say. I'll say this, in terms of the confusion that culminated in the moment in which we currently exist, I'd still put it under the heading of underrated, right? Because it felt like so many mixed messages.
Right.
I saw a story today, just yesterday, by way of example. The government did the thing with, apply here and get your own free home COVID test kit. And I saw a story, and it was talking about someone was saying the test kits are maybe 30 will have 30 to 40% inaccurate results. Okay, well, now of course that means it'll have 60 to 70% accurate results, of course, but does somebody take and that's not an advertisement, that was an article on a website. But in terms of a confusing message, what does a person listen to? Right. So I would still say underrated, because the level of confusion that was caused by all of it, wherever it came from, it was enough that the only thing that you can get rousing agreement on today, whatever a person thinks about COVID and vaccines and masks, is that we're all tired. Right? We're all, whether you think COVID is a hoax and a sham or created in a lab, whatever you think, the one thing that we can all agree on is it went far farther and it's gone on far longer than we would have ever expected, and that we're all just tired of it.
Being seemingly crazy, you can find people like Donald Trump or Elon Musk that go around crazy, or even people like I don't know if you've met this professor who goes around in the quad and screams, like he's a rapper. Yeah,
I haven't had the pleasure.
We actually had him on Tuesday, so I will send you the interview.
Really?
Yeah.
He goes around. He's a professor.
He's a professor. So
okay.
The thing is, if you don't
have to send that to me,
and
please.
and police have come up to him, students have given him money. It's insane. And the guy, he got a PhD from Chicago, and he's written 3 books, and a professor of sociology. And he's a rapper. Many things that he does. He's a rapper, and he goes around and he feels inspired. He just goes like yelling, like "Whoa!" and like loud. You can hear like from many like.
Wow.
Anyway, but of course he's not crazy. So people like him or people like Donald Trump, Elon Musk, who seem like seemingly crazy from the outside. Such behavior for either marketing purposes, business purposes, whatever. Overrated, underrated?
I think it's overrated, and I'll tell you why. Is because people sometimes look at what they isolate the crazy behavior, right? Or they isolate the outlandish behavior, and think that or approach whatever it is that you're trying to deal with as though if I just do that crazy behavior, I'll have the same success that person has had, right? And that's not the case. For whatever a person thinks about Donald Trump, his image wasn't built in 2016. He didn't start building his image in 2015. His image is as billionaire tycoon success. His image as billionaire tycoon success is many decades old, right? You were speaking of rappers, the crazy professor rapper a moment ago. But you can go back to rap songs in the 1990s, for example, and his name being inserted into songs as an emblem of success. I'm gonna fly around the world on my private jet like Trump, whatever the case is. So that image, decades old. Elon Musk, we think about him only as attached to Tesla, but that genius, iconoclastic image has many other things that are built into it, right? And so sometimes, and the reason why I say it's overrated is because people think, well, if I just do that thing, well, they go on and they're crazy and they act wild and they say outlandish things and they insult people or they cuss or whatever the case may be. Whatever the outlandish behavior is, well, I just got to do that. Or I have to do that times 10. No. If you dig in and you analyze, there's a whole host of other things that have allowed them to maybe make that the singular part of the thing that they're recognized for, but you can probably look in the background and see a whole host of other things that they've either done or tried that got them to that point. I mean, again, for Trump, again, that image of billionaire tycoon, I mean, was solid. And it was there before 2015, and he's able to tap into that, yes. He's able to tap into that, but also the notion of, and this has been discussed many times in American electoral history, that whatever the nation's problems are, it takes a business person to solve them. Right? And so he's able to tap into that as well, because who am I? Well, I'm a successful business person, right? And you've known me for the better part of 20, 25 years as a successful business person. Put me in charge. And so, but some people think, well, I just need to be outlandish. Well, I just need to insult. Well, I just need to. No. There's a whole host, and that's what I meant earlier of, you can decide that you understand a person's formula. Just be crazy, just be outlandish, just be wild. Well, I'll just be crazy, outlandish, and wild. But it won't have the same effect for you, because you don't have the same foundation, you don't have the same background that person has. So I think it's very much an overrated approach.
And perhaps they're not even being crazy, like they're just being themselves or whatever.
Yeah.
And last question. I have to ask you this question. But if you were to put a billboard on green streets, what would you say?
You know, that's a great question. I think I would say something along the lines of, don't let the University of Illinois be the end of your education. Keep learning, because there's always so much to learn, and you'll have so many chances to invent and reinvent yourself that whomever you decide you are at 22, 23, 26, when you stay for grad school, whomever you decide at that point that you are, you don't have to be that person at 32 or 36. So don't ever stop learning, right? Don't think, well, I got my bachelor's, I'm done. So don't stop learning ever.
That's great.
Yes, it's great. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for your time, for coming and to talk to us. I mean, I had a great time learning so much from you, and we're really grateful for taking the time and coming to talk to young guys who are trying to learn from the wisdom of people like you. So again, thank you so much.
You are quite welcome. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. For everyone watching, if you have any questions for Dr. Chambers, please feel free to put them in the comments, and we'll try to get to him and get them answered. I'm sure you learned a lot from this conversation. We touched on a lot of topics, misinformation, advertisement over the years. And if that resonated with you in some way, I hope you can put something in the comments if you would like to know more about it. Till then, I would say stay curious, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I love that. Stay curious. That's the other thing I think I've noticed about a lot of successful people. They're just curious, just about a lot of stuff. There's no consistency about what they're curious about. They're just curious. I just like to learn stuff. I just like to know stuff. And that's actually one of the things that interests me about a lot of advertising creatives that I've run into over the course of my career, is they just have a lot of just different interests. It's like, and they bring a lot of those interests to advertising, and it makes them just wonderfully interesting people to talk to.
Yeah,
a lot of them.
Yeah, and here everyone tells you, focus on one thing and do that. Yeah. And in reality, like most of the people, or whatever you want to say, so many interests. And when you look back, they all combine perfectly to make that perfect ad, or to make that perfect company, to make the perfect formula for Coca-Cola or whatever. And I think that's something that is, again, so underrated, so kind of intuitive, and curiosity.
Well, yeah, and you brought up Mark Andreessen earlier, and like you said, I mean, he would tell you, I wasn't the greatest coder, I didn't have the greatest ideas, but I whatever it is I had the right mix of something.
Right.
And maybe I got lucky, I got fortunate, and that's another interesting question that I like to, and maybe you guys can use this, that I like to ask entrepreneurs, or high achievers. Where were you lucky? Right? And you almost always will get an interesting answer back that somewhere, they can, if they pause and think about it, somewhere in there was just a moment where they were just lucky, fortunate, right place, right time. But that becomes the part of it that you just can't replicate. Now, you have to be in place to be lucky. You have to have done the work to be lucky, of course. But when those things meet, right, then many of them will say that was my moment. That was the thing that took me to where I was, even if I wasn't the best at this or the best at that or the most accurate at this. But all of my work came together in just the right moment when I met the right person, right location, whatever the case may be.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
I have to. Somebody said that to me, and I was like, that's a great question. And so I've asked it ever since, and I've almost always gotten just a really interesting answer back. Some people don't like to think about it as luck. Some people, if they're religious, like to think about it in terms of being blessed. Or some will say lucky or blessed. And you almost always will get an interesting answer kind of back, because they can probably pinpoint a place where their career or their options and opportunities just kind of turned or took off.
And you cannot just tell me that question without having to ask that question back.
Exactly. What did you get?
I do want to know that.
For me, it was probably when I was in undergrad. the moment that set me in the course of the career that I'm on, I was an undergrad and I was talking to a professor, just a professor in the history department of the school that I went to, Bowling Green State University in Ohio. And she told me I should consider going to graduate school. And I hadn't thought about it before, because I was planning to teach in high school, maybe coach and things of that nature. And then she started telling me what it was about and so forth, and that was the path, the part that put me on the path that that I'm on.
Yeah, because if you didn't have that person.
Yeah, and it was just one of those conversations after class one day, but it became one of those impactful conversations because I took the path forward. I took the path forward from there. Right? So I just stayed after class one day, and we were just talking one day, and that's where it came from.
Yeah, there's this economist, Tyler Cowen, and one of the things he says is that one of the greatest return thing you can do for the world, the greatest investment with the highest return investment, he says that it's increasing the ambitions of people. Mm-hmm. Like telling them, okay, you want to do X? How about you do X, but also you do X squared? It's like the biggest thing too. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something I try to do because, who am I to, I'm not one, but like, who am I to like tell, you're thinking of becoming an engineer to work at X company. Mm-hmm. Why don't you, knowing what you know, why don't you try to create such a company? Why don't you try to work on a project that you actually want to do, or something like that? Mm-hmm. And like, I think that's something that I always try to do. And so I have a blog, so I write essays. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the biggest things that the common pattern, looking back at hundreds of essays I've written, has been that I always try to, show some things I do, or tell people, okay, it doesn't matter if you're in high school or in college, there are always things you can do that are almost a little more. Mm-hmm. And the reason why you can go a little more is because what's stopping you? Like there's not like a cap of what you can do at your age. It's usually you either did not think about it or you just didn't know it was possible. Mm-hmm. Something I always try to do because I think, completely, I'm not thinking about myself or anyone, just like for the world is such a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just pushing people beyond what they feel comfortable doing.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderfully said, and that's where it's important to, the network of people that you have around you, you keep people around you that can inform, keep people around you who can encourage, people around you who can push you to do more than you think that you can do, or to ask for more than you think that that you can do, right? And that's one thing that was actually a point brought up last night at the Freelancers and Entrepreneurs Forum is, because the question came up, or the question sometimes comes up, how do I know when to work for free to try to build my portfolio, or to build my experience, to build my deck, what have you, versus charge? And, their response was, once again, you might do something pro bono if it's, maybe a social service cause, but other than that, if it's part of your work, know your value. Right? Know your value and charge accordingly, right? And don't let people devalue you. And one of them said, she said, my reason is because of the people, if they could do it themselves, they would do it, right? So if they can't do it themselves and they want you to do it, then your time is worth something, right? So, so charge accordingly. But that's sometimes hard for people to do. Well, I don't have any experience. How can I actually charge money? Do you know how to do something that they don't? Well, yeah, charge them money. If you want, of course, you can charge them time, or you can barter services, or whatever the case may be. But get the value for whatever your own investment is, and don't allow others to necessarily devalue to that point of you keep pushing, keep striving, keep trying to achieve, keep creating, right? Keep innovating, and that that as a skill set, or that as an approach will always serve you well. Right?
That's the American spirit, in a way.
Yeah, and again, there's so many options and opportunities available to you now that we don't have to make the same level of investments that that you used to. Like I said, like we were talking about earlier, but not that long ago, if you wanted to have a business, that You had to pay for, you know, a rental location. That was where you started. You couldn't. People won't take me seriously if I work out of my house. So I got, you know, I have to rent an office. So I go pay for a lease for somewhere for 6 months. Business fails, and now I'm on the hook for, you know, $800 worth of rent for the next 3 months. So there's so many options and opportunities out there. You just keep pushing this drive.
And that's something I'm so excited about, because not only the cost of making the thing you're trying to make are so almost for free all the time, but also the way to distribute that, to advertise it. You can go to Twitter, and they're all, you know, Facebook, whatever, they're all free. And you can, the distribution, the cost, and just being able to do that thing. It's one of the things I'm most grateful for, and something that I'm very aware of. And I think that's where one part of my big sense of urgency comes from, is that we have these things that we have that are, you know, like free. We have this distribution that we have that, you know, people, I don't know, 10 years ago, they had no idea it would be possible. And we're so fortunate to have those things that it would be such a dishonor, like this service to the world, to ourselves, to not do that thing. And to not do it because you felt you couldn't do it, or because you were afraid, or because you had X reason. So that's something I always think about, because there are so many things, like you said, so many things you can do. You don't know how they're going to be helpful, or how they're going to make you successful, or how they're going to make you money. But as long as you, like, it's usually something that happens in your brain, or something that, like, it just feels right. It just feels like you have the energy, and do not do such things because of homework or because of X, Y, and Z. It just come. I think that's, if I had to put a definition of crazy, that would be one of.
Yeah, you use the energy while you got it, because you won't always have it, and use the resources of a place like the University of Illinois, right? You've got some of the world's great thinkers here.
Exactly.
They sit in their offices and they'll answer the email because you're a student. Why wouldn't they? So use those resources. Use the things that you have access to. Use what's in front of you. And I think sometimes that is also a challenge that people run into, is they make the mountain so high to climb that, again, back to my point about that I was telling you about the game, that they look up and I haven't started. Right? I haven't actually started. I was talking to somebody, members a couple of years ago, and they wanted to start a website. Someone they want to start a website, or whatever it was. And you see him a few weeks later. Oh, how's the website going? Well, it's not. I didn't really get it done. This and that and this. And well, why not? Well, I couldn't decide on the colors. So they had gotten caught up into color psychology. Orange means this, blue means that, purple means the other. So they allowed themselves to get slowed down by the minutia of the thing that they didn't. Completely sapped what energy they had, because they're sitting there ruminating over. Well, is it purple combined with yellow and green? And they never got started. But that's the difference between, I was talking about Steve Jobs today, so it's probably why it's on my mind. But, I always like what he said, which is real artists ship. Right? At some point, man, if you're really a writer, you put the thing out there for people. If you're really a creator, you create something, you give people a space to look at it and comment on it. And so, my example, the person from the website, they wanted, I'm sure that they wanted to create, but they allowed themselves to get caught and slowed down by something that ultimately doesn't matter. Right? But if you read, or at least, you allowed yourself to get stopped by, probably on a list of what is step number 5,742, you let it stop you on step 3, and now you don't have your website. Right? So that's the other thing. You don't let silly things stop you.
Yeah, I think the guy from LinkedIn, the guy who founded LinkedIn, he said that if you don't, by the time you launch or ship your product, if you're not embarrassed by it, you launch too late, which is the idea of pardon my French, but if you don't make a shitty draft or shitty products, you're not gonna be able to, for me, I read a lot, or I create a lot of things, and during the pandemic I decided to I'm gonna make 100 videos for every day for a row. They were all bad, bad, if you look at it. But once you're learning, whatever, but they were bad. And that experience helped me to make videos right now. And if you were to compare the two, like, how in your right mind would you put the video out there? But of course, it doesn't matter. Like, they're bad. Like a lot of my essays are bad. I know that for a fact. But it doesn't matter because it's like you said. I always remember this story of this sculpture class, and there were two type of classes, the same class, same professor, everything, and there were two sections. So there one section was, okay, you have 30 days, and you need to make this sculpture. And so one class, section A, in the sculpture, how it was going to be done is that you're going to learn from the best. You're going to read all the books. You're going to learn all the details. Section B, make one sculpture every day. And by the end of both the sections of the end of the 30 days, the better sculpture was from section B, the people who make one bad sculpture every day for 30 days, which talks about the idea, quality, when you're starting out, quality is not as important, but the quantity is a lot more important when you're starting out. And of course, once you get, big enough and everything, then of course, worry about the details and like everything. And I think like we are like such a great partners, because I'm very like, okay, let's make the video. Like, for years I made YouTube videos on my phone, which is bad audio, whatever. And for him, he would never do that. He would make sure he would have the best camera, best light, best this, best, all the best. And I think we make such a great like partnership, like such a great like project, because we complement each other like so well. And yeah, I think you learn so much, like, all of these things that you don't know how in the future they will help you, but just like, I know things you said to us today, will come back in the future and like, oh my God, this professor told me this, and like, thank you, like, thank you so much. Yeah.
I appreciate that because I remember, and it still is. I mean, it's so easy to get intimidated, especially when you study people that are more successful at whatever the thing is than you. That's why one of my favorite books, and I turn back to it every few years, is a book called The Courage to Write. Right, The Courage to Write. And what the point of the book is it goes through a number of people whom we would consider, regardless of genre, a number of people that we would consider to be, great writers, great authors, right? Written world-changing books, or written, books that people will read as long as there is anything called books. And this book talks about some of their own anxieties about their own work, how they thought it was going to fail, how nobody's going to like this, and it becomes these world-changing experiences for people. And so the point is that even amongst the people that we consider to be maybe so successful, so confident in what they, what it is that they've done, they've got this whole other host of, worries and anxieties and concerns about what it is that they've done. But they also have that last little bit, which is that courage to write, courage to produce, courage to create, courage to release. And that's what separates them, again, that person from that person who wanted to write the book versus the person who's actually written and released the book. And that, I think, is always, in terms of books and things, it's always been something that I like to remind myself of, those anxieties, those worries, even amongst people who are, hella successful, right? They still have those same concerns. I was just watching a story, I forget which, I think it was a basketball player. It was a professional athlete, very successful. I forget their name right now, but they talked about how they still threw up before games. It's like, I wish I could remember their name, but I remember reading it and I said, but you're person X and you've got all this success and so forth. No, I still have the same fears that I did like back when I was on the junior varsity team. But I still go out there. I go out there on the field or on the court or whatever. Yeah. So, garbage in, garbage out. But so be careful who you listen to. So.
Yeah, and I think that something like this project is like, it's a way to curate. As a way to like, because like we are learning so much here. Like we've had 10 episodes, and we've learned about so many topics that I don't think you would have learned in 4 years of class, of a degree or whatever. And I think it's like you said, like listening to people who are, it's like you said, like it's kind of hard to describe, but like who like being careful to who you listen to in a way.
And learning the right things from it.
Yeah. And learning the pieces of it. You could talk to a person for 2 hours, and only 30 seconds of it means anything to you, but you had a good conversation. But that 30 seconds is the thing that resonates with you, and you just, you carry that thing forward with you, and that becomes the little piece of it. Back to our discussion of speeches. That becomes the only thing we have to fear is fear itself moment from that 2 hours that you spent with that person. So the rest of it, you kind of eject, but that 30 seconds kind of matters to you, or the skills that you're developing just in doing what you're doing here, right? The trying, or the thing that you learn when one of the cameras fails, and we thought we had this over here, but this is how we learned to edit it, and this is what we decided. The next thing you know, you guys graduate or whatever even beforehand, and you're selling your services as short film producers, right? short videos, short content creators, because you've got a skill, and as long as you have a skill that other people don't have, and they want the thing done. Man, I just need you to do the thing. Can you do the thing? Yeah. Okay. Boom. Then how much do you charge? And that's it. Right? And so the skill set you develop, that you always have it with you.
Yeah, it's like you can say that almost like someone who's successful was not afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah. And if they're candid, they'll tell you, man, I made a lot of them.
Yeah.
I made a lot of them. I remember one of the person that I'm writing about, that I wrote my third book about, advertising man by the name of Tom Burrell. There was a moment at which he was almost out of business. Right? There's a moment in which he was almost out of business, and we talked about his mistakes, and he was like, there was, at that point in my career, I was consumed with the production of advertising, that the content of our advertising be so great that I wasn't paying the attention that I should have to the finances of the business. I'd have accountants come in, I'd hire people, but he said they start talking about things, and I'd go, yeah, whatever. Because I wasn't concerned about the finance of it, and not being concerned about the finance of it almost put me out of business. I almost overlooked things for so long that I didn't have a business left to come back to. So mistakes like that, right? If you read about him, you might think, oh man, that's a great businessman. He's in business for over 40 years. His agency's still around. He sold. He's a multimillionaire. He lives down in Florida now, on and on and on and on and on. But if you talk to him, you know his story. My own mistakes almost put me out of business, put me back on the street. So, yeah. And people will tell you that if they're candid, but that's where I like the question, where were you? Where were you lucky? Where were you lucky? Where were you fortunate? Where were you blessed? And a lot of times they'll sit back and think, and you get a really interesting answer kind of back.
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. I think even if you ask me, or like just thinking about the answer, just such a wonderful exploration of thoughts and things.
Yeah, because so much of it, again, it's obviously it's like they say, the harder you work, the luckier you get. But it's you have to be in place for the luck. But usually there's just somewhere along the line, you're just like, yeah, it was right there. My life it just kind of turned.
And it was a conversation with this professor, that professor, that 10 second, 30 second, that just literally changed everything.
Yeah, my office was in the right building. I was in the hallway, and so mentioned, and I decided to go down to the hotel bar, and I started talking to, and went from there. So yeah, you get a lot of interesting answers, right? So
things happen.
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you for inviting me.
Of course.
It's a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. So
We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
and also send me that information about the professor.